Under the intense lights of one of the world's biggest poker tournaments, the champions shone like untouchable legends. But among them, sitting almost like an intruder, was a player with no chips, no fame, and no respect. The audience ignored him. His opponents underestimated him. However, hidden within his silence was a mystery. Would he have the audacity to turn an unlikely bluff into the biggest upset of the night? If you're also curious to find out how this story unfolds, like and subscribe to the channel, because what comes next will surprise you. The champion's gazes were like sharp blades, cold, calculating, and filled with arrogance. With every move the underdog made, a muffled chuckle echoed around the table, as if his mere presence were a bad joke. It wasn't long before the commentators reinforced the verdict. This guy is out of the running. The audience, accustomed to applauding big names, barely looked away. After all, who would put their hope in someone who seemed so out of place? The scene was reminiscent of the shy schoolboy sitting in the back of the room, ignored by everyone, but who keeps a notebook full of ideas no one imagines. Underestimation has this effect. It transforms a human being into a shadow, into nothingness. And yet, it can be the spark for the most unexpected flame. And it's at this point that the narrative gains strength, because every time the world decides to ridicule someone, it is, unknowingly, paving the way for the improbable. This is what happens in life. That intern who doesn't get a voice in a meeting could be developing a strategy that will change the company. That writer rejected by publishers could be creating a work that will span generations. The common mistake of those who consider themselves great is to think that being overlooked is synonymous with victory, when in fact, it can be the beginning of their own failure. As they mocked, the player remained motionless, almost expressionless, bearing the weight of stares that tried to crush him. This calm was more disturbing than any words. It was as if he was saying, without moving his lips, "You have no idea what's about to happen." Deep down, their contempt was fuel, each laugh a brick in the castle of his silent confidence. Think about this in your daily life. How many times have you been disbelieved? Perhaps when you decided to start your own business and were told it wouldn't work, or when you decided to change careers and were laughed at for your boldness. This is the essence of the poker table transformed into a metaphor for life. The world tests your courage by mocking it. And curiously, the most inspiring stories are born precisely from this contrast between the laughter of others and the faith of one. It is in the silence of resistance, when you refuse to bow your head in the face of collective disbelief, that the game begins to turn. And here, at this point, where everyone still believes they are dealing with a lost amateur, doubt would begin to emerge, albeit imperceptibly, like a crack in an apparently solid wall. At that table filled with champions, every move was analyzed, as if it were a puzzle. The audience watched attentively, accustomed to seeing major comebacks, but convinced that nothing special could come from the underdog. Then, when the cards were dealt, and it was his turn, the unexpected happened. He looked at his hand and without a hint of hesitation risked everything. The cards were mediocre, unworthy of someone venturing into a tournament of such magnitude. The audience burst into laughter, and his opponents exchanged incredulous looks. "It's crazy," muttered one of the commentators. "No one in their right mind would do that." But behind that boldness, there was more than met the eye. His gaze wasn't that of a desperate player. It was the gaze of someone who knew the weight of silence, the power of trust, and the impact of an unexpected gesture. This move seemed absurd, but it held a profound lesson. How many times in life do we need to gamble on something seemingly fragile? Imagine the entrepreneur who opens his store with little capital, while market giants scoff. Think of the student who takes an unlikely exam, while family members doubt. The underdog's bluff wasn't just about bad cards, it was a statement that courage, poise, and conviction can be stronger than statistics. It's like that saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight inside the dog. When he pushed the chips to the center of the table, he wasn't showing weakness but planting the seed of doubt. And in any game, whether at the poker table or in life, doubt is the weapon that unbalances even the most prepared opponent. The champions, accustomed to recognizing signs of strength and fear, began to look at each other. Some laughed out loud, but others frowned. There was something strange there. How could someone in such a disadvantaged situation remain calm? It was like facing a novice salesman who, faced with hostile customers, speaks with such firmness that it seems he has years of experience. The underdog's posture belied the weakness of the cards. He didn't sweat, didn't tremble, didn't look away. This detail, simple to some, was what began to turn the tide. Because in poker, as in so many aspects of life, the body betrays what the mind tries to hide. And he knew this. He breathed rhythmically, like a rehearsed actor dominating the scene. Small movements, controlled gestures, eyes fixed. It was almost as if he wanted to say, "I know something you don't." The audience, previously united against him, began to divide. Some still scoffed, convinced that failure was seconds away. But others began to whisper among themselves, intrigued. What if he had a card up his sleeve, literally? This "what if" is powerful because it transforms laughter into hesitation, and hesitation into fear. It's the same thing that happens in business negotiations. When one competitor underestimates another but notices a confident stance, they begin to wonder if they've missed something. The bluff, therefore, wasn't just a risky move. It was the creation of a psychological atmosphere capable of reversing roles. The amateur, previously despised, became the enigma no one could decipher. This moment is crucial because it shows how small actions can change the course of an entire narrative. A firm look in a job interview, even without the most impressive resume, can be the detail that plants positive doubt in the recruiter. A bold proposal, presented with conviction, can turn the tide against stronger competitors. It's the old story of David and Goliath, retold in a modern poker room. It's not just what you hold in your hands that matters, but how you present yourself in the face of battle. The underdog understood this and, instead of shrinking, swelled with presence. His apparent weakness turned into armor, and that's why the silence that followed his bet felt so much heavier than any previous laughter. As the champions watched, him trying to find flaws, he maintained the serenity of someone who knows that uncertainty is the greatest weapon against arrogance. In every held breath, every muscle that remained still, there was the construction of a nearly unbreakable character. It's curious to note how, in our own lives, this same logic applies. When you stand firm under pressure, whether in a presentation, to the company, or defending an idea to a group of non-believers, it doesn't matter so much whether you have all the answers. What matters is conveying that you believe in what you're saying. And this belief, reflected in your body and gestures, is what makes others hesitate. What seemed like a simple, desperate move then turned into the first turning point. The bluff, still unsolved, was already beginning to erode the champion's confidence. They, who had always used pressure to crush their opponents, now experienced the bitter taste of doubt. And herein lies a vital lesson. Sometimes, you don't have to win the entire battle immediately. You just need to plant the first seed that destabilizes the enemy. The underdog had done just that. His bluff wasn't about winning the hand immediately, but about building a storyline in which he would go from being seen as a supporting character to the protagonist. And like any good plot, this initial twist wasn't the end, but just the beginning. The cameras, the audience's eyes, and even the opponent's thoughts would begin to revolve around this new element: doubt. The easy laughter was no longer as firm. The arrogance was beginning to crack. And amid this tense atmosphere, every detail would be scrutinized, every gesture interpreted as a clue. After all, if an unlikely bluff could shake the champion's confidence, what else was to come? The cameras began to move like watchful eyes, capturing every detail of the table. The commentators, who had previously spoken in a relaxed, almost comical tone about the underdog, changed their tone. There was something there that could no longer be ignored. The champions, accustomed to dictating the pace of the game, now discreetly turned to observe the stranger's smallest gesture. His breathing, which should have been accelerated by pressure, seemed controlled. No tremors in his hands, no fleeting glances, just an enigmatic calm that in moments transformed an amateur into an object of investigation. The camera closed. On his face, and millions of viewers at home felt the same doubt that gnawed at the champions. Was he just acting, or did he really have something on his hands? This moment is powerful because it exposes how the human mind searches for patterns amid chaos. A renowned player raised his eyebrow, trying to decipher whether his opponent was blinking too much. Another leaned forward, observing his fingers, resting on the chips. Any detail could be the key. It's the same logic as a detective at a crime scene. When the facts don't add up, all that's left is to follow the invisible clues. It's curious how this type of investigation doesn't just happen. In poker, think about job interviews. The recruiter doesn't just look at your resume, but at the way you smile, the tone of your voice, the firmness of your handshake. Small signs that reveal what lies behind the words. The underdog knew this and became a master at offering mixed signals, a dance between confidence and mystery. Meanwhile, the audience was beginning to change its tune. Before, they'd laughed at him as if he were merely an intruder. Now, they leaned forward, attentive as if watching a soccer final about to be decided by penalties. The commentators, in hushed tones, reminded everyone that some of the greatest bluffs in history had begun exactly this way, with players who seemed fragile but maintained an unshakable posture. And that's the beauty of poker and of life. It's not just the cards. You're dealt but how you play them. Often, the investigation others conduct into you reveals not your cards, but rather your ability to stage, to control the environment, and to create narratives. The champions began exchanging glances, like generals realizing they might have underestimated the enemy. Some forced smiles, trying to appear indifferent, but the tension was palpable. Their weakness-hunting instinct compelled them to test the underdog. They bet higher, like shining lights in a dark room, hoping to reveal what was hidden. But with his every move, the darkness only seemed denser. It was impossible to tell if he was playing a strong card or simply performing flawlessly. This uncertainty corroded like rust. And with every minute, more chips were pushed to the center of the table. This silent investigation is reminiscent of how we interact with people in everyday life. Imagine being in a negotiation. You observe not only what the other person says, but also what they leave out. The way they cross their arms, the pause before responding, the way they breathe. These small signals are the poker of life. Great leaders, negotiators, and even investors know this. Warren Buffett once said he prefers observing a team's behavior to listening to profit projections. Because deep down, numbers can be deceiving, but the body almost always reveals the truth. The underdog, however, managed something rare, transforming his own body into an enigma. Neither the smile, nor the look, nor the gestures gave away what was truly there. The audience at this point was no longer a mere spectator. It was complicit in the tension. Every time the camera locked on their eyes, they held their breath. And here comes a relevant lesson. Collective perception can be shaped by those who have the courage to sustain the narrative. He had reversed roles. He was no longer just the target of the investigation, but the protagonist driving the scene. He was like a speaker who, even without impressive slides, can hold the attention of an entire room simply by the confidence with which he speaks. This skill isn't born of luck, but of the constant practice of believing in yourself when everyone wants you to doubt. The champions continued their analysis. One of them, an expert at reading micro-expressions, forced bets to see if the underdog would tremble. Another provoked with sarcastic comments, expecting a rash reaction. But nothing. His calm was almost unnerving, as if he were at a picnic rather than a $1 million tournament. And this is where the investigation began to turn into an obsession. The more they looked, the less they understood. The more they tried to force him, the more solid his mask seemed. And suddenly, the initial laughter was gone. In its place, a heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of chips clashing in the center of the table. This silence is a detail worth its weight in gold. In life, it functions as a powerful weapon. Think of a debate. Sometimes, it's not the immediate response that gives strength, but the strategic pause that makes the other side lose. In negotiations, silence can be worth more than 1,000 arguments. The underdog knew how to use this resource masterfully. He didn't need to win yet. He just needed to fuel doubt, pushing each opponent to the brink of the psychological abyss. And the more they probed, the more they realized they were losing something essential: control. Doubt is like a virus, silent, invisible, yet devastating. In poker, when the enemy begins to doubt what they know, the game has already changed hands. And in that instant, the audience understood they were witnessing a turnaround. The underdog, without raising his voice, without needing a powerful card, had become the central mystery of the night. What had seemed like an investigation against him had become a trap against the champions. And this game of mirrors, where every detail was re-examined, was still far from revealing its climax. And so, as the cameras focused on the tense eyes of the champions and the unbreakable silence of the underdog, a certainty grew in the air. If a simple stance had already destabilized giants, what would happen when the next play arrived? The champions, once confident as invincible generals, began to exchange silent glances. There was something uncomfortable in the air, an invisible noise that only they seemed to hear. Each, accustomed to calling bluffs, now found themselves entangled in doubt. One of the veterans, renowned for destroying opponents with sharp provocations, leaned forward and made a sarcastic comment. "Nice courage. Too bad it won't last long." The audience laughed, but the underdog remained impassive, as if he hadn't heard. This silence wasn't empty. It was a psychological blow. Anyone who's ever been in a meeting where everyone questions your idea knows the power of standing firm, without over-explaining. Sometimes, not responding is the most devastating response. With each round, the champions tried to surround him, raising the stakes in unison, like predators stalking prey. But instead of backing down, he matched each move with a disturbing calm. It was as if to say, "Keep going, I'm in no rush." This kind of confidence unsettles even the coldest of competitors. Think of the investment market. When everyone rushes to sell, there's always that investor who remains calm, buys into the chaos, and then watches the market turn in their favor. The underdog played exactly that role. His calm amidst the mounting pressure made the veterans begin to question themselves. After all, if he were such an amateur, he would have gone broke long ago. The most intriguing thing was their collective behavior. The champions, who rarely banded together, began to act almost as if in an implicit alliance. It was as if they needed to prove to the public that they still owned the game, that no newcomer would dare ridicule them. And that's precisely where the trap lies. The more they tried to call the bluff, the more trapped they became in its narrative. It's the same dynamic as an insecure leader who insists on asserting authority at all costs, ultimately revealing their own fragility. The renowned players, seeking reassurance, failed to realize that each excessive move was another rung on the ladder built by the underdog. Suspicions grew like a shadow. "Does he know something we don't?" whispered one. Another, more experienced, fixed his gaze on his rival as if searching for a secret hidden in his breath. But nothing emerged, and that was even worse. It's like investigating a riddle and finding no clue. The absence of answers is what scares most. At this point, the tension was no longer just in the cards, but in the minds of each champion. They were caught in a cruel dilemma. Trust their own experience and risk ridicule, or back down and admit they had underestimated the man no one took seriously. The room, gripped by suspense, began to feel the weight of this psychological confrontation. The audience no longer laughed as much. Now they watched with wide eyes, sensing they were about to witness something rare. And the underdog, with his stony calm, continued to construct his silent narrative. It was the harbinger that the story was about to reach a new level of intensity, where the masks would fall and the real game would begin. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The champions, already tired of the enigma, decided to tighten the siege. One of them, known for never backing down from a challenge, pushed a huge stack of chips into the center of the table. The gesture echoed through the room like thunder. It was a call to confrontation. The audience cheered, convinced the underdog would be powerless to resist such pressure. But to everyone's surprise, he maintained the same serene expression, as if that avalanche of chips were just another wave crashing on the shore. The contrast was almost surreal. On one side, the arrogance of the champions trying to crush him. On the other, the imperturbable calm of someone who seemed to read the soul of each opponent. This moment reveals a simple yet powerful truth. The real game is rarely in the cards, but in the psyche. When a leader, a negotiator, or even an athlete displays calm in the face of maximum pressure, they disarm the most prepared enemy. It's like a boxer who, even after taking heavy blows, remains standing, smiling. This shakes any opponent's confidence. The underdog knew this, and instead of retreating, he pressed forward. He firmly matched the bet, the sound of the chips hitting the table marking the rhythm of his courage. The previously incredulous audience erupted in murmurs. He wasn't just accepting the confrontation, he was inviting it. The champions looked at each other, uneasy. Each tried to hide their discomfort, but it was impossible to disguise it. Their initial arrogance no longer had the same shine. One of them nervously drummed his fingers on the table. Another bit his lip, something unthinkable for a player accustomed to maintaining poise. The underdog's calm was a revelation in itself. It showed that his weapon wasn't perfect cards, but the ability to read every move, every gesture, every shadow of doubt in his opponent's eyes. And that's exactly what, in real life, separates the bold from the ordinary. It's not just what you hold in your hands, but how you react under pressure. Then came the climax of the provocation. A champion raised the stakes even higher, trying to force his rival to give up altogether. It was the classic attempt to crush with numbers, volume, and power. Anyone who has faced authoritarian bosses or giant competitors knows what this means, using brute force to command respect. But once again, the underdog didn't give in. With the calm of someone who knows every second is in their favor, they firmly pushed their chips in. The room fell silent, as if even the collective breath had frozen. It was clear that the confrontation was no longer about cards. It was about who would have the courage to stand their ground until the end. This confrontation, more than a dispute over chips, was a revelation for everyone. Victory often stems from inner control. When you face adversity without wavering, you create a psychological environment where others crumble. And that's exactly what happened. The champions, weighed down by the weight of their own doubt, began to realize that perhaps it wasn't the underdog who was at risk, but themselves. And so, amidst chips and tense glances, the game took an unexpected turn. A turn that could only lead to the climax of an already unforgettable story. The pot grew until it became a giant in the center of the table, drawing all eyes like a treasure impossible to ignore. The stacked chips reflected the light in the room, glinting as if they carried not only money, but also the honor and ego of every player present. The silence that fell was almost suffocating. Not even the commentators dared break the moment. The audience held their breath, aware that they were witnessing one of those rare moments that would go down in history. Every movement, every finger tap, every glance felt like thunder in the soundless void. The champions, one by one, began to feel the weight of the pressure. The underdog, still as a statue, held his ground with unshakable confidence. He didn't need to speak. His calm was the most deafening message anyone could convey. His opponents, accustomed to intimidation, found themselves intimidated. One gave up, discreetly pushing his cards toward the dealer. Another hesitated for several seconds before retreating. The room erupted in murmurs. No one could believe their eyes. Only one champion remained, the most arrogant of all, who forced one last defiant look, but soon gave in too, unable to bear the psychological burden. It was then that the revelation came, not as a scream, but as a silent explosion. The underdog turned over his cards. They were weak, almost ridiculous compared to the monstrous pot he had just won. The audience oscillated between laughter and deafening applause. The bluff had been exposed, but not as weakness, but as the greatest display of courage ever seen in that hall. The impossible had become reality. With nothing in his hands, he had defeated giants with nothing but confidence, boldness, and an impeccable reading of others' minds. It was the perfect climax, where the improbable turned into victory, making it clear that in poker, and in life, the game isn't just about what you get, but how you play. The hall erupted in applause, but also in respectful silence. It was a rare mix, disbelief and reverence. The discredited player, the one who had been treated like an intruder, now gathered all the chips with steady hands, unhurriedly, as if he knew this moment was already written. The champions, who had laughed at him with every play, looked at each other in astonishment. The weight of the lesson hung in the air. Titles, fame, or experience weren't enough. Without courage, everyone is vulnerable. And there it was, narrative justice in its purest form. The despised player had defeated the giants with mere presence, confidence, and psychological awareness. The audience, which had previously ignored him, now gave him a standing ovation. They weren't just celebrating the tournament victory, but also the breaking of an established logic that only the greatest names could shine. That night showed that courage and a strategic mind can overcome perfect cards and established reputations. It's like in life, when someone who's been discredited manages to thrive in a hostile environment. It's not just a personal achievement, but a collective reminder that the improbable also has a voice. Thus, the bluff that no one believed turned into the greatest victory of the night, proving that the game never belongs only to the strongest, but to those who dare to believe in themselves until the end. The room had already returned to its normal buzz, but something remained suspended in the air. The feeling that everyone had witnessed more than just a game. The revealed bluff was not just a risky play, but a living metaphor. It showed that life often requires courage to move forward, even when we don't have the best cards in our hands. What separates defeat from victory is poise in the face of pressure, the ability to believe in yourself when no one else does. The underdog, silently, had taught this with every look, every controlled gesture, every chip thrown with conviction. As he left the table, he wasn't just carrying chips, but the respect of everyone who had previously despised him. The silent. Champions were forced to face the lesson. Experience without humility is arrogance, and arrogance always finds someone willing to challenge. The inspired audience took home a simple and powerful reflection. In poker, as in life, it's not just the hand you're dealt that matters, but the courage to play to the end. And perhaps what makes the biggest difference isn't the final destination, but the courage to take a risk when all seems lost.